This is That So Second Millennium, where we explore issues at the interface between science, philosophy, and Catholic theology. I'm your host, Paul Giesting, and your co-host is Bill Schmidt. Welcome back to That So Second Millennium, episode 139. So in this episode, Bill and I have a pretty lengthy discussion. The unifying themes are uranium and energy. Within those themes, we go a little far afield. Biochemistry, world politics, kind of hard to avoid these days. But so this episode looks forward to the talk that I'm going to get to give at the Society of Catholic Scientists Conference this coming June. The theme of the conference is going to be about ecology and the environment. So that's going to be very exciting. So I'm going to give a talk about uranium, the uranium cycle, mining, milling, processing, dealing with spent fuel, radioactive waste, all that sort of thing, with special attention to the situation in Wyoming, which is a big uranium mining state. So, as far as the larger discussion goes, Bill was patient with me. There's some parts that Morgan, our valiant editor, our diligent editor, are going to have to cut out where I got a little testy, I think, about China's role on the world political stage these days. But we certainly enjoyed recording it. I hope you enjoy listening to it. And without further ado, here is some thoughts about uranium energy in the world today. Well, yeah, so I'm broadcasting here from my extremely comfortable hotel room in the middle of the medical complex in Billings, Montana.
Montana.
It was a 1/10 of a mile from the audiology clinic that I went to for my appointment this morning. So
I see.
It seemed like an obvious choice. And despite some of the reviews on hotels.com and elsewhere, I've heard plenty of sirens in other parts of Billings, but I haven't heard one from my hotel room. Of course, I am deaf, and that's why I'm going to the audiology clinic. But
jeez.
One review mentioned helicopters, which I'm like, yeah, because that's the nature of things out here, Bill. Is it's like I have my college health insurance has coverage for being airlifted to some place where they have actual medical equipment, as opposed to the Band-Aid station in Lander, Wyoming, whatever that amounts to.
Yeah.
So. Town of 7,000 people. There's one town of 10,000 people 30 miles away, and then crickets.
Gee whiz.
So, it's a long way. So Billings is a significant... I haven't been in a city bigger than Billings since, of course, Christmas. So,
and what's the population of Billings?
That I couldn't tell you. It's dense enough that I bet it's 100 grand.
Oh, wow.
I bet it could be bigger than South Bend, Mishawaka. You have to ask questions like that. So now there'll be that tappity tap noise in the background while I go on Wikipedia and check the population of Billings. It's an interesting place, actually. There's a lot of history around here. Have you ever heard of a place called Powells Pillar?
Oh, no.
Okay. It has a trade area of the Billings metropolitan area has 184,000 as of the 2020 census.
Well, that's pretty good.
Trade area, whatever that technically means, of 500,000.
Huh.
That's a lot. That's a lot for the West. That's a lot for Montana or Wyoming.
Really? Yeah, that might be the equivalent of Michiana,
right?
In the commercial radius of activity in the region or something.
Yeah. I mean, so where I'm in Lander, if you've got something significant wrong to you, get airlifted to Casper, which is 100 miles away, give or take, I think.
Wow.
I don't have it off the top of my head. Haven't had to be airlifted to Casper. Haven't been counting the minutes and trying to guess what the airspeed velocity of my helicopter is, taking me there. I know somebody who was. Well, I don't know somebody who was. I met somebody who was hiking the Continental Divide Trail about around the 1st of August, and his dad was hiking it with him and got airlifted to Casper. So he hiked to Jeffrey City and found my hotel and me, and so I took him to Lander and had breakfast, and So that was an interesting exercise. That was the West, right? Like this is not things that happen to you in Indiana.
No, that's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah.
And definitely not in New York. My goodness.
Somebody gets lost on the Appalachian Trail, but even then, it's like, how far are you from Syracuse or Harrisburg or someplace like that?
That's right. Yeah. Well, more power to you for enjoying and embracing the wilderness, what we would call wilderness, or at least the wide open spaces.
Yeah, I mentioned Pompey's Pillar earlier, and I almost think I've been thinking in the back of my head for hours now that I think somebody in my family mentioned visiting it at one point, but it's a site on the Yellowstone River here east of Billings where Clark, as opposed to Lewis, left his initials, and the comment from the National Park Service, it's a national monument. It's just it's a sandstone butte, not very, very small. I call it a butte because it's wider than it is tall, but they called it a pillar. And why Pompey got dragged into it, I still have no idea. But Clark left his name and date on this sandstone monument that already had a number of Native American petroglyphs and whatnot, and then of course tons of other people in the 19th century put their initials and names and whatnot on it. So,
an early case of graffiti?
Yeah, seems to have been, because it's a standing stone in the floodplain of the Yellowstone River. So there's now wheat fields and whatnot around it, but not too far away there's other rocks. It's not like you have to go that far to find rock.
You would think so.
In central Montana.
Whoa, yeah.
Eastern Montana, maybe. I haven't been to eastern Montana, but if I follow I-94 to Bismarck, I suppose you might see some spots where, there's hard rock is hard to come by, but that's not the case here.
No, I bet. But I imagine that your embrace of the wide open spaces includes a love of the various kinds of land that include mineral ores.
As it turns out, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, pretty much all of these places. That the mountains, oddly enough, seem to be the place where you go to find all of the metals and most of the other things. So
that's something. And I know from my having covered metals and mining at an early point in my journalism career that that's been an endless source of controversy, and there are major problems with what's left over from mining.
Oh, yeah, always. And the larger the scale it is, the worse the problems, broadly speaking, are.
Yeah. So I know uranium was of interest to you. Is it particularly because Wyoming is facing growth in uranium mining, or because it's a substance that you pay attention to, or because the news is paying attention to it these days?
I mean, my interest in uranium goes a long way back. So I don't remember how Notre Dame got onto my radar as a possible destination for graduate school back at the turn of the century. But,
the turn of the century. That's right, 2000s.
Yeah, I was at a brew pub for dinner tonight. And they were playing music from the aughts, and I was like, that's
the old days.
The old days, yeah. And I was already a little past it at that point. I mean, the stuff that will really sort of yank at my heartstrings and be like, oh yeah, I was 18 once. That's the 90s, right? So, but this place was playing stuff from after the turn of the millennium. So it's for people to tug at the heartstrings of people who are now in their late 30s, I suppose, which I no longer am.
That's all right.
It's only go one direction. Only go one direction.
But as they say, it's better than the alternative.
It's better than the alternative. Yes.
Yeah.
I hope. Well, I mean, I hope that the alternative includes the vision of the divine essence. But
Right.
Yeah, I still have, on the other hand, I still feel like there's some things that the divine essence has for me to do here before I go and confront it face to face.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so we will see.
Yes. Please
But,
consider that essential from the divine essence, so you won't leave us prematurely.
I have no intention of doing that. But yeah, somehow that got onto my and what there were various things that drew me to Notre Dame, but the fact that I would work with Dr. Burns, so those of you who are Simpsons fans, not Mr. Burns.
Not Mr. Burns, right.
Yeah, it's Dr. Burns, who studies uranium nevertheless. And he has quite a group, and he gets a lot of money from the Department of Energy to do what he does, because it's basic science to understand primarily what we can do about the consequences of uranium mining, and also what will we ever do with all of the spent fuel that we have as the result of commercial nuclear reactors. Since Jimmy Carter said we're not going to reprocess it, that's a proliferation hazard, then I guess for all the things that Jimmy Carter said that we've conveniently forgotten, apparently we're still living by that one.
Interesting.
That is still the word of God, as far as I know there. So the French have been doing it for 50-odd years, but that's apparently off limits for us. So, I mean, and I can't possibly go into I don't know the economics of why that doesn't work. That's, does it raise my hackles because I hate wasting things? Yeah, it sure does. I mean, spent nuclear fuel, high level waste in general raises my hackles because there's just some sort of, what's wrong, Bill, with highly radioactive material? I mean,
that's difficult
obviously I'm fishing for something, but at the same time, I actually do want to, what's wrong with it, right?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. I think most people would say that it's simply difficult to handle, and as implied, it's difficult to prevent other people from getting their hands on.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those things are true, and they're true because it's putting out energy.
Yes.
And wasn't that the point of mining the uranium in the first place?
Well, that's right.
To get energy out of it.
That's right. It shouldn't surprise us.
That's the weird thing.
Yeah.
That's the weird thing. I mean, and in fact, we, of course, it's a controlled, specific isotope of plutonium that's used for this purpose. But radioisotope thermal generators are put on spacecraft that can't be run off of solar panels, partly because they're too far from the sun.
I see.
Partly because, so there have been Mars rovers landed with and without them. So Opportunity had a good long go of it with just solar panels.
Wow.
But the lack of sun did eventually do it in. So the one since then, Curiosity and whatever the new one is, you'd have those of you who are NASA fan people, who I respect greatly, by the way. You'll see those 20-some girls with NASA T-shirts, and they have a posse.
Yeah, I love it.
But in any case, I forget the name of the new one. It's the Mars 2020 rover has done 2020. It has landed. It's on the ground, and I forget what name it wound up with, because I exited Mars science in about the middle of the last decade. So
I see.
Unfortunately, I don't carry that name with me, but I believe both of them have radioisotope thermal generators, and it's just, here's some plutonium. It's putting out radiation, and that is converted over to heat and turned into usable electricity, and away you go.
Right.
So what are the solutions? So we have all of this stuff, and it's dangerous because it's putting out energy, and in an inconvenient form, in various inconvenient forms. How do we turn them into convenient forms? It's not a straightforward process, but nevertheless, ultimately, that's the frustrating thing, is it's inconvenient because it's putting out the exact stuff that we mined it from the ground in the first place to get.
Right.
So anyway, but that's sort of one high level overlook to it. But, so I got into uranium. Why did I choose to go there as opposed to, I visited Princeton. I went to the University of Michigan. That was actually, to be perfectly honest, as someone who wound up at Notre Dame, unsurprisingly, there was something about I got out of the taxi in Ann Arbor and I hated the place. It just felt like suburban, blah. So, and then I don't know. I was just totally underwhelmed by the day that I had at Michigan, even though, Michigan, obviously Princeton, But in geoscience, they're more equal than they are broadly speaking. I mean, John Q. General Public is like Princeton is on one level and Michigan is clearly on another. In geoscience, they're pretty comparable.
I can see
they
that.
are both very, very, very good institutions, and they were the highest prestige institutions that I visited, which was something that was just somehow managed to be over my head when I was 22, 23, making this decision. It's interesting to look back on. I might have gone to Minnesota. There is an interesting character, also a character. I mean, a lot of geology professors are characters. That's one of the things about the field. A very different character named Mark Hirschman, who does, so far as I know, he may be retired by now, experiments on materials that are found deep inside the Earth, which was what I had been doing at WashU as a senior and as a master's student at WashU, working on high-pressure minerals. So, Mark Hirschman had a big multi-anvil press where you take this vroom-filling apparatus and squeeze it in on an octahedron of magnesia that's 1 centimeter on a side, and it gets to, let's see, I think you could get to 2 gigapascals in that thing and 100 kilopascals. So let's do a little math in my head, 20,000 atmospheres, something like that. Mm-hmm. It's fairly significant. It's not deep in the mantle, but nevertheless, it's a lot more interesting than room pressure. So you could do funny things. So I decided to go to Notre Dame because the chemistry of uranium is just weird. Basically, that's the long and the short of it. That was the final decision making element. I think it's the lunatic fringe of the periodic table. I
love that. I mean,
it has nothing to do with its radioactivity. It's just strange. So uranium. So the fundamental chemistry of uranium. It can obviously you can turn it into a metal, because it's a metal, and you can get it to the zero valence state, which is a very reactive metal, more than aluminum, something probably kind of like magnesium. I don't think people handle metallic uranium all that much. It does have a +3 oxidation state, which is fairly reduced for it. From inside the Earth, it tends to be +4. So, if you get stuff in a granite, which is one of the places you can mine uranium from granites. I think there's some places in New England even where that's been done. Other places around the world. And in those forms, the uranium tends to be black. So uraninite. Pitchblende is the sort of rock name of something that's got a lot of uraninite in it. I'm simplifying a bit. Mm-hmm. But that was, I believe, with the Curies, Pierre and Marie Curie, I believe, separated radium, which is a decay product of uranium, from pitchblende. Okay. So that's one of the common things. So they would have found that in Germany somewhere, I believe. Maybe Poland, but I think Germany. I don't think there's much to speak of in France. But and then when you oxidize it, when it's in contact with the Earth's atmosphere, which the Earth's atmosphere is so strange that things catch fire in it. So it's very our atmosphere is very chemically unstable. It's one of the odd things to stop and think about. The Earth is the only planet that we know of yet where things can catch on fire.
Really?
Because the fact that things catch fire is an indication that they are radically chemically out of equilibrium. So the fact that a tree is sitting there with all this cellulose in it, in an atmosphere that's 20% free oxygen, free molecular oxygen, that's insane. To sort of drive the point home, Guy Consolmagno, who is going to be actually decorated by the Society of Catholic Scientists here this coming June.
Excellent. He's
the one that they're going to give the St. Albert Award to.
Wonderful.
Makes me very happy. I don't think I'm going to be able to pry him away from Rome. I tried to get him to come to Wyoming Catholic, and he said he's really kind of getting to the point where travel is a lot on him, which I'm 42 and I pay transatlantic flights myself. But he's not a spring chicken anymore. So I don't know if they're going to get him in person or not, but at the conference at Mundelein Seminary in Chicago this coming June, they're going to award him. So in his textbook about planetary science, which I taught out of, he has the example where if we find 3 exoplanets, which when he wrote the textbook in 95, we had found a couple around a pulsar. because pulsars are easy, but there aren't many planets around pulsars, so I think we have only ever found the one. I may be wrong on that, but in any case, so suppose we find 3 exoplanets. We somehow, he said, send a probe to the system, but as it turns out, we don't need to do that. One of them has a very thin atmosphere. One of them has, a thickish atmosphere. Maybe it's 1 Earth atmosphere of carbon dioxide with some water vapor. And then one of them has this insane atmosphere that's like 40% xenon and 40% argon and 20% free fluorine gas, which is so reactive that it can catch water on fire because fluorine is the only thing in the periodic table that loves electrons more than oxygen does. So it will mug oxygen for electrons, which nothing else dares to do that. Other than that, oxygen is a big bully. Once your electrons and wants them right now, and you may as well hand your lunch money over while you're at it. But yeah, so if you found 3 planets like that, which of the 3 of them would you be most suspect has life on it? Based on, of course, the only thing we have to go off of is Earth prior to this hypothetical solar system.
Well, in this strange world of Murphy's Law, I'd say the least likely and most volatile.
I.e. the fluorine planet.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because the only thing that could come anywhere close to driving chemical reactions that far out of equilibrium that there would be free fluorine gas would be life. It's the only thing that comes anywhere close. So because life has somehow decided that it's going to take the radiation from the sun, waste a bunch of it, and process carbon dioxide into free oxygen and use some water and create carbohydrates and, the entire biochemical chain of life. But there's an enormous amount of free energy that gets tied up in the process of making free oxygen. So that's an answer, and I haven't delved, I don't know what the depths of the literature are on that subject. But it is one of those things that at a moderately involved level of knowing a decent amount of chemical thermodynamics, that's insane. That's not, and of course it's exactly what needed to happen, because the only way we could ever get multicellular life is for something like oxygen to be floating around, to be our rocket fuel, because we need rocket fuel to do multicellular things.
Yeah.
Without free oxygen, we'd be stuck at prokaryotic life. We'd be stuck at bacteria.
Amazing.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So without this massive oxidation event, which was, by the way, an enormous you want to talk about an ecological catastrophe. Cyanobacteria created a bigger ecological catastrophe than humans have yet to manage. We're working on it, but turning tens of % of Earth's atmosphere into free oxygen, which destroys delicate organic molecules. That's impressive. I mean, it took them hundreds of millions of years to get the job done to the current level, but that's impressive. That's hardcore. And driving all of their peers, their anaerobic peers to place wherever they can find hiding places, wherever they can get away from oxygen in deep dark muds or hot springs in Yellowstone or places like that.
Right.
Anaerobic environments, the bottom of bogs where they can create bog people. Things like that. But aside from that, but the big wide open spaces now are all for us crazy, eukaryotes that have evolved incredibly complex protective mechanisms to keep ourselves from being destroyed by this oxygen that is also our lifeblood.
Right.
Yeah. Existence.
Well,
like Chesterton said, the most dangerous thing is to be alive, because we're always in danger of dying, right?
That's correct. Yep. we're not going to get out alive. We're not going to get out of this place alive. Yeah. And who knows? I didn't know that oxygen was one reason. But yeah, I'm not surprised. And also the what you're describing there as the amazing difficulties and complexities is a kind of metaphor for the other thing I was going to say about uranium and about nuclear power, and that is that the problem I see with it is that it's so amazingly complex from start to finish. We've talked about the difficulties with waste disposal that Carter saw, etc., and the mining, and then there seem to be so many steps in between, and even there are different kinds of extraction. Right? There's the leaching and the actual milling, and and then you've got some uranium has to be processed or elevated to an even higher level of radioactivity. There's just so many steps.
There are a lot of steps. And then if you go reprocessing, you have more steps. Yeah. And those steps have to be carried out on, high level radioactive material, the Purex process and things like that.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah. No, it's problematic. Wyoming is a very good place to mine uranium. So it was interesting to wind up moving out there for my position at Wyoming Catholic College. So immediately after the war, which is still the war, there have been wars since then, but nothing to compare to World War II. When it was clear that uranium was kind of important, it was going to be kind of important strategically going forward.
Right.
People were out looking for uranium in all sorts of strange places. I'm told that I Love Lucy even had an episode lampooning the uranium craze.
Gee whiz.
That Desi and Lucy went out and tried to make their fortune uranium prospecting.
Wow.
So in central Wyoming, the town of Riverton, which is at the border of an Indian reservation, the Shoshone and the Arapaho, the Eastern Shoshone and the Arapaho. So in the region, there have been there's been some uranium mining, so a significant amount of uranium mining. And of course, once you bring in Native Americans, you're almost inviting and then there's some story about how white people took advantage of the Native Americans.
Oh, indeed.
So there's a story here as well.
Yeah.
The spot where they decided to, in the early days, the Atomic Energy Commission was kind of a centralized, government body. This is a strategic resource. We want all of the uranium you can mine. We're going to take care of, pricing it and setting up collection points for your ore and things like that. So there's a spot on the railroad in Riverton, Wyoming, that they, this is the story that Wyoming public media actually investigated a while back, a number of years back. So this is, I'm repeating basically their article. I can't say that I've done any investigation to check on it, but the story of there are these people who basically threatened this guy on the reservation into selling his 20 acres or something that was right by the railroad, so that they could build a mill.
Wow.
And they built a mill, and they took in however many thousands of tons of ore. And the thing about it is that every metal has a level based on the price of that metal and the difficulty of getting it out of its ore. But every metal has some concentration at which it becomes economically viable, right? And so that varies radically. So for iron, tens of % of the ore have to be iron. You have to be pulling something out of the ground that's almost, pure iron oxide.
I see.
So since there are places on the Earth's surface where that can be done, because iron is a major element, there's so much of it. It's one of the top 6 or 8 most common elements in the Earth's crust. And the deeper you get, the more iron there is. Not that going to the mantle is a viable source of iron, let alone the core, but the deeper you go, the more iron there is. So that's, so that limits you to places, the specific places on the Earth's surface. They are gargantuan deposits, but they set the price for iron worldwide. And, if you don't have that much iron, you don't have to worry about your place being undermined by iron mine.
Right.
So, but and aluminum, likewise, a major element. There's only a few places where there's concentrated enough aluminum oxyhydroxide, bauxite. It's basically
Right,
weathered
bauxite,
soil,
right.
heavily, thickly weathered soil, thick weathered soils. But then if you're looking for gold, the price of gold is such that parts per million, somewhere in the parts per million level, gold becomes economically viable, which means that you process an enormous amount of rock.
My goodness, yes.
To get, a volumetrically very small amount of gold. But that amount of gold is, a ton of gold is worth, I would have to go find some numbers and throw them at you, but however many tons of steel, however many tons of iron, it's a lot. Same economic price, same payback to the mine owner. So uranium is on the pricey end. It's not as pricey as gold, never has been. But it's pricier than copper.
Mm-hmm.
And copper is mineable at I think tenths of a weight percent. So uranium may be mineable hundredths of a weight percent. So that's a lot of rock to process.
Right.
A lot of rock to process. So Riverton wound up with this very large pile of tailings.
Yeah.
That they were there for a while, and the tribe finally pursued its legal remedies to the point where they got the Department of Energy to take the tailings pile and I think basically put it back in the old mines. Most of them, like more than half of the mines in Fremont County, Wyoming, are closed now. So and of course, and back in that day, people were mining uranium conventionally. So they were digging tunnels and they were, hauling ore out. And they were using, 20th century equipment for sure. It wasn't like, slave labor mining tin in the British Isles and the Roman Republic or something. But
right.
But nevertheless, I mean, there are people doing stuff that we would really not rather people do today with, and uranium is radioactive. While getting it on your skin is actually not that big a deal, breathing it in is very bad.
Interesting.
Because your skin is thick enough to block the alpha particles that the uranium itself and many of its decay products emit. Gamma rays, and certainly some of them emit beta particles. But alpha particles can be stopped by the epidermis. But if you don't, it wrecks that epidermis. Now, fortunately, that epidermis is dead.
Wow.
So wrecking the epidermis is not a big deal. But if you get it on lung tissue, which is all alive,
yes,
that's very bad. That's very bad indeed. That's why radon is such a concern, because radon is one of the decay products of uranium that's a gas, because it's a noble gas. It's the only thing at that part of the periodic table that can possibly be a gas is because it simply refuses to bond to anything. So that's problematic, and that's why radon is so problematic. Mostly why radon is so problematic. So it's a black lookout. It's an ugly industry. It's a costly industry. And the world as it stands today gets a lot of its uranium from Kazakhstan. And a fair amount of it from Russia. But, of course, that's a little different now that, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is still ongoing, and we don't know where that's going to lead.
Right.
In the United States, mining has shifted to a very different procedure called in situ leaching, which is basically using water to do the mining for you.
Right.
So that's, full disclosure, I have $400 in an investment account. Well, at least when I invested it in 2008, it was $400 in a company called Uranium UEC. Gosh, what does the Uranium Exploration Company? Gosh, I don't even remember what UEC exactly stands for. But they have some mines, they have some mines in Texas. So like South Texas, for example, is a very good place to do this type of mining. There's some uranium in fairly permeable sandy rock, and you pump in water that is chemically conditioned to dissolve the uranium. And fortunately, because uranium's chemistry is so strange, it's actually not so hard to find a cocktail that will leach uranium and not other things. So that can be done. And you pump the water out at a different spot, and so you create this kind of circuit underground where you're pumping in solvent and then pumping out the uranium enriched water. It's not a perfect process. None of these things are ever perfect. It's actually very much the same technology that's used to clean up a lot of contaminated sites, contaminated with a variety of things, be they organic or metals contaminants. Which fortunately means that technology is actually somewhat robust. People have looked into it for a long time, for decades. But again, nothing's perfect. But it's a heck of a lot better than sending Joe or Jose down into the mine. Maybe he's wearing his mask properly. Maybe he's wearing a mask. All of that. It's a great deal better than that. That's what the industry is moving toward.
And how is Wyoming regulating the activities in the state?
The state of Wyoming, like the state of Texas, has a state environmental department, which every state has at this point. And they have different regulatory histories. Many of them have split off from the State Department of Health. That's the history in Indiana, for example. In Missouri, they've taken it into the Department of Natural Resources, which is definitely not what the Department of Natural Resources does in Indiana. Wyoming has a Department of Environmental Quality. Texas has a Department or Commission of Environmental Quality. I think it's the TCEQ. Don't quote me on that, but you could look it up.
Right.
But nevertheless, so the state regulatory department has oversight over what permits they write. So there's some level of state law and state regulation or rulemaking by appointed bodies to govern these processes. So, and the level of federal oversight, since it's uranium, there's got to be some level of federal oversight. I've never tried to permit a uranium mine. That's not my professional field.
Right.
So that I'm not so sure about, but there's almost got to be a federal level of oversight as well, just because it is uranium. If you're permitting a gold mine, you're probably doing that at the state level. But uranium probably involves the feds. At some point, the Atomic Energy Commission gave over to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC.
Right.
So they've taken over a lot of the mess that the AEC left behind. Sort of like the Department of Energy has taken over a lot of the mess that the Department of Defense left behind during the era when we were actively creating fission weapons, which are still the state of the art because every thermonuclear weapon has a fission component to it. But so that's the Department of Defense was just not. So at some point in the 80s, I believe, perhaps the 70s, that was turned over to the Department of Energy, and it's still the Department of Energy's baby, cleaning up all of these old weapons-oriented sites. So is it a given that Wyoming is kind of bipartisan and kind of gung-ho way all for this? Or? Wyoming is fairly gung-ho toward any kind of mining industry because that's sort of, Wyoming is a very sparsely populated state, and that tends to be the case, that agriculture and mining take a proportionally large proportion of the economy in states like that. So I don't know that bipartisan is really the right way to look at it. I'm actually let me look up real quick. I should know this. What is the current makeup of the Wyoming legislature? Because I don't think that bipartisan really is something you need to worry about. No. So Chicago, right? When I was in Chicago around, in the years around 2010, I think there were 49 Democratic aldermen and 1 independent out of 50.
Right.
And the Wyoming legislature is not quite that drastic, but close. The Republicans have 51 of 60 seats in the House and 28 of 30 seats in the Senate.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's one of those states where the party in charge. It's fissures within the party in charge, right? Are you
Right.
in Chicago? It would have been, are you in the Obama wing, or are you in the Daley wing of the Democratic Party? That sort of thing. I haven't been in Wyoming or thought about the legislature long enough to really get into these questions, but I think in Wyoming it must likewise be: are you a stalwart or a mugwump?
Right. If you mug on one side and you're wump on the other. Yeah.
We use those. That's the only terms I know to describe Republican infighting from the late 19th century. But that would be what we would be talking about.
Right.
So I'm probably, if you had to classify me, I'd probably be a mugwump if memory serves. But
but I'm just fascinated by the overall and big picture context of it as well, whether you think and whether Republicans or conservatives necessarily think that the future must contain big growth in nuclear power and therefore in uranium mining.
It sure doesn't have to. I mean, but what are the alternatives? I mean, so we want energy. So, I mean, option 0, so to speak, is stop using so much energy, fools.
Yes.
Okay. People have kind of given up on that. I mean, I certainly don't want to give up completely on that. I think that's a thing that probably ought to receive a lot more, says the guy who I at least have taped film over my drafty windows, and, I keep my thermostat at 61
Very good.
in the Wyoming winter. So I'm trying my best there. I drive my little, comical Mitsubishi Mirage that gets 40 miles to the gallon, so it's at least got that going for it. And I drive it on gravel roads where it really doesn't belong because I live in Wyoming now. But
you got to. You're in Wyoming.
I got a geologist in Wyoming. I got to go on gravel roads sometimes.
That's right.
So I think it's got almost 130,000 miles on it. So I've done fairly well out of that.
It works hard for a living. Yeah,
it works hard for a living. It is green. They only painted them that color of green for a couple of years. I don't think you can buy a new Mitsubishi Mirage and that ain't easy being green. That much the green that it is.
I love it.
So Kermit has in fact lived a tolerably hard life. He's driven on a lot of roads where Mitsubishi Mirages are not commonly driven. But he's easy to find in parking lots because it's like, oh look, pickup truck, big pickup truck. Oh look, there's my car. Okay, yeah. It stands out.
Green car.
As long as it's behind, as long as it's not directly behind the Dodge, Ram, whatever. Yeah, it's okay. I can find it pretty easily.
Right.
So I think I try to lead the life that I want other people to live to at least some extent. So that I'm at least doing that, and I think that's worthwhile. I think your secular Franciscan spirituality, I think, has something to say about that. But on. Yeah, I mean, that's a hard sell. And I don't want to, commit people in India or sub-Saharan Africa to, not being able to use a little bit more energy than they currently do, because I'm pretty sure they all use a lot less than I do. So I think there's still growth that we need to get from somewhere. Okay, fair enough. We could just keep burning fossil fuels. They'll last a while. They'll almost certainly last longer than the pessimistic pundits think they will, because, I mean, people have been predicting peak oil since the 70s, have they not? So, yeah, we'll keep coming up with new ways to get hydrocarbons out of the ground. We can develop ways to make it less problematic. But, I mean, as wary as I am of, people talking about climate change and global warming, I mean, I'm wary, but nevertheless, it's a pretty straightforward measurement to say we've added 100 parts per million of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere on top of we started with 300. 100 on top of 300 is a big change.
That's great.
I don't know what the exact consequences of that change are. I think there are people who think they know what the exact consequences of that change are, and I don't believe that they know exactly what the consequences will be. Mm-hmm. But there are consequences. There are going to be consequences. I mean, there's going to be. Okay. So, all right. Well, then we move on to renewables. Okay. Well, we've got solar. We've got wind. I don't know how much we could possibly ever get out of tidal energy. People don't like dams. So, yeah, I mean, but yeah, I mean, hydroelectric dams are a very proven technology, but we feel like we've got just about enough hydroelectric dams in the world at this point. We've dammed just about enough beautiful gorges and stopped about enough fish spawning runs and whatever the heck else. I get that. I sympathize with that.
Right.
All right, what else are we going to do? Okay, solar. Well, I'm not an expert on solar, but solar depends on fairly sophisticated chemistry where we're doping silicon sheets with exotic metals like gallium and whatnot. I don't think we see a way around that yet. I don't know if there's a way to turn that over to a completely organic system. Maybe, conceivably. But, so there's a guy, I feel like, I'm going to drop his name, Michael Schellenberger, the guy with the book with the polar bear on the cover that says Apocalypse. The title of his book is Apocalypse Never. So I think I listened to Apocalypse Never early last year.
Yeah.
He makes some valid points. I mean, one of the key takeaway points from that book is we need dense energy sources. So if you're in the Congo and you're sneaking wood from the National Preserve to create charcoal to cook your food on, it takes a lot of wood because wood's not that dense of an energy source. Whereas coal, a coal mine, which has been neatly geologically processed for us to be very dense indeed, is a much more energy efficient. I mean, it's not energy efficient, but it's a more space efficient for sure way of getting that energy. Okay, of course, it's not renewable. It's not very renewable. I mean, it is being renewed in some sense on the current planet, but, it's a tens of millions of year cycle.
Right.
We're not really interested in waiting for that, which is a crude way of saying that coal is not being created anywhere near the rate at which we're burning it. Oil is not being created anywhere near the rate at which we're burning it. Natural gas, likewise. And again, it's putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we feel like maybe we've had enough. Okay, I get that. I sympathize with that. Solar. All right. Well, like I said, solar, unless we radically change the technology. The reason I went on that excursus is that solar is still, it's limited by the amount of sunlight you get per square meter.
Exactly.
And as a matter of fact, we don't capture anywhere near 100% of that light per square meter. So that makes it a fairly energy non-dense source.
Interesting. Yeah.
Do I want solar panels on my house when I ultimately own a house again? Yeah, I think so. I would like to be contributing because, what's my roof space doing? I want asphalt shingles. That's a net zero. That doesn't seem so hard. But I know that a certain amount of, heavy metal mining is being done to support the solar panel industry. I mean, again, unless we come up with a completely, which I hazard a guess is probably possible, that we could someday get to a point where we're creating some kind of organic film that can do the same thing as these semiconductors. But I don't know that we're anywhere close to that. And solar is a lot more friendly than wind. Wind is the wind turbines are kind of problematic. They're not very energy dense,
right?
And they kill a lot of things.
Yeah, I had not realized that fully, but it does make sense. They're not risk free,
and they're
intermittent as well, huh? And
they're intermittent. They're not very predictable. Solar is more predictable than wind, but not predictable. Tidal is fairly predictable, but there's only so many places you can put tidal generators. So that's the problem with our, so solar and wind are our standard renewables at this point. That's what we say we need more of.
Right.
And maybe we should install more of them. Maybe solar in particular. But until we're putting orbital arrays of something and then beaming power down, and I don't even know what channel we would use to beam it through the atmosphere and try to pick it up here onto the Earth's surface. But until we're doing something fairly Star Trek like that, those have limits due to their density. So that kind of brings us back to, all right, as much as distasteful as this is, all right, what's nuclear got? Well, fusion is still 20 or 30 years in the future, just like it's been since the 60s.
Which is something, yes. The timeline has moved, yeah.
Yeah, that goalpost keeps moving. I mean, I have heard the most promising thing, Bill, I've ever heard about fusion energy is that somebody in the 70s made a prediction that we needed to invest this many $100 million in 1976 money or something into it.
Right.
And we've done maybe half of it or 2/3 of that.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not so much, maybe, hopefully, the hope is that it's not so much that it's an impossible dream as it is that we just got bored with it. It didn't come along fast enough to suit us because it is a very, very tricky physics problem.
It is, huh? Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, I think, to be very helpful that computing power has gone. I mean, there's some people doing some really interesting work and just trying to simulate the plasma inside a fusion reactor and how to deal with that. Maybe it will get done. Maybe even in my lifetime, we may get to the point where we have at least a working prototype fusion reactor that's putting out more energy that's being put in to maintain the plasma. It might happen. It could happen. I mean, the sun runs.
Yes, that's right.
100 centillion stars can't be wrong, right?
Correct.
However many there are in the universe.
Yeah.
But that's not a near-term solution. That's not a 20 years from now solution even. Yeah. So we kind of come back to our ugly duckling. All right, fission, what you got?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's the problem, is that are there solutions to the problems that fission poses? Honestly, I think there are, but they're politically unpalatable.
Right.
And are they politically unpalatable for good reasons? Sometimes. Sometimes, I mean, do I feel like, if I were to talk to the Shoshone, for example, in particular, I get that you have an extreme dislike, distaste, discomfort, and distrust of this. Yeah, I get that. But dear God, you get so much energy out of uranium. It is so energy dense. And India is trying to go in the direction, I believe, of thorium reactors, which Godspeed. Because anything, I mean, I hate the way that their politics have turned in terms of, becoming Hindu nationalists and, persecuting Christians and whatnot. I kind of wanted to like India. I want to like one of the countries that has 1 billion people in it because I kind of feel like that's the future.
Yes.
But I mean, all that said, I still prefer India to China every day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Yeah.
So I hope they have great success with that because they can mine thorium in India and not uranium. By the luck of the draw, I guess they don't have nearly so much of that. So, but thorium is, again, it's an actinide like uranium. I don't know what process. I have to imagine you need some uranium to sort of get it started. I'm not familiar with the process by which you generate nuclear fuel from thorium, but yeah, I mean, China's going pretty gung-ho for nuclear reactors because it gets the job done.
Yeah.
It gets the job done. I mean, and it would be nice to have, new technologies, new exciting technologies like they're talking about that can do various things like, I don't know, do your taxes for you while it's generating energy. But but even a conventional nuclear reactor such as we already have, if we run it well, if you don't leave unupgraded nuclear reactors on the seacoast next to a subduction zone like the Japanese did, that's sort of bad. But I mean, but that's the psychology. I mean, the reality is we need to face the psychology of nuclear energy. And the psychology of nuclear energy is that people have hated it since the 60s because it's scary and dangerous, because it's related to nuclear weapons. Can it get over the taint of being associated with nuclear weapons? Okay, I get that too. But unless you're willing to, even if you're willing to turn your thermostat down to 61 like me and drive a Mitsubishi Mirage as little as possible, we're still going to need to do something to get more energy. And if you're, protesting in the streets and, chaining yourself to Parliament and whatever else you're doing to say, we're killing the earth because we're putting out more carbon dioxide. I'm saying that in a shrill, somewhat, comical voice, but okay, if you really believe that, what are you going to do? Frankly, we freaking need nukes. We need them. We don't have to like them, but that's the solution right now.
Right.
That's, to me, a combination of reasonable renewables and, an aggressive form of reasonable and energy conservation, which is like, what are we going to do? It's going to need to be cultural. We're going to need to believe that that's cool, even if we vote Republican.
Right.
And we're still going to need nukes. And then we're going to need to we're going to need to do something with spent nuclear fuel. And if we can't politically, decide that we're going to send it to Yucca Mountain or wherever else, then frankly, kids, let's get it out of the ponds at every reactor spread around the country and start reprocessing it.
Exactly.
Let's figure out how that works. And again, it's not like we need to do that from scratch. We know how to get plutonium out of spent nuclear fuel. We've been doing that for a while. We know how to create breeder reactors. All of those things are known technology, and we can continue to improve it, and God hope we do, but it's kind of got to be on the table if we're serious about this. Are we serious about this? Or are we going to keep building natural gas reactors and, buying Vlad Putin tanks?
Yes. Well, that's exactly the kind of pursuit of wisdom and the acceptance of hard, inconvenient truths that our politics needs much more of.
Yeah. Well, we need to. Everything doesn't need to be something about a way to score points on the other side.
Amen.
Like literally everything needs to stop being a way to score points on the other side.
Yes, yeah. And we have to start at the points where we actually do have at least a little control. Wasn't it Chesterton who said, well, what is the big problem with the church? Let's start with me, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with me.
For sure.
Because then at least, and it's the same way with this American geopolitical dilemma. We have to start with ourselves and be dedicated to fairness and justice and truth and democracy, and again, avoiding all that propaganda BS and really just going for the greater good, which and that's the truth, and that's reality, and reality wins eventually. Yeah.
It does. we can't wrestle it down.
No.
It always gets us in the end. It always does.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. And I like that ability to connect the realms of religion and geopolitics and energy and the environment. There are certain universal truths.
They are all interrelated. We live in a world where it's, there are no real problems that we can consider in isolation. Whether that was ever whether we ever could, that's another question. Maybe we never could, but it's clear and obvious now that we cannot. But that's not a way to, that doesn't get us anywhere.
Well said. That's right. Yeah. Wow. Well, this expanded way beyond uranium mining, but it sure did justice to the complexity of that subject and how it relates to other subjects.
It does have consequences. That's why I am privileged that I'm going to get to give a talk. I did actually just find out recently, the last few days, that I am going to get to give a talk at the conference about the uranium mining and its aftermath, the industry in general, with a focus on the local issues in Wyoming. and the sort of environmental justice issues there. But we are talking about the environment, ecology, and the environment, I believe, is the focus for this year's SES conference.
That's right. And when is that conference?
It is the first weekend of June.
First weekend of June.
It's at Mundelein Seminary in Chicago. So, as always, I believe the talks will be, I think they'll be live streamed, and the recordings will be up at catholicscientist.org after the conference.
Right.
So there'll be resources available for the broader public. So yeah, there'll be some very interesting stuff. People talking about soil and the critical nature of soil resources. So as a farm boy, that's a talk that I really look forward to.
Oh, wow. Good. Yes.
There'll definitely be people talking about Laudato Si. I shamefacedly, Bill, I'm going to have to admit, I am finally going to have to read Laudato Si.
Yeah.
How I have gone this long without reading it, I don't know. I apologize.
That's right.
But
that's the Pope Francis magnum opus, or at least a central work.
Yeah. Well, and having read Fratelli Tutti and not Laudato Si, like, what am I? Okay, I know. There are many things to read in the world. Lots of things have been happening in my life, but this is the point where I absolutely must sit down with this. I don't know, what does it run to, 200 pages or something?
Yeah.
Probably depends on which of course, probably try to avoid getting a print edition because I don't need to consume any more paper. But
that would make sense in this case, especially.
Yeah. So I'll try to get an ebook version of it because PDFs translate to my Kindle very poorly. But yeah. We'll do my best. But yeah, so it'll be very interesting. And I don't know who the other contributed talks will be by, but I'm very much looking forward to it. So.
At least we're talking about all of these things.
Yeah,
someone's got to start the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be a little grandiose to say that we're starting the conversation, but we do have to. I mean, and because politics has polarized and it's one of those things. It's like, did we flip a coin for every issue and decide which side was going to get which side of which issue? I mean, it's like, does the party that has to be 100% for saving human life in the womb have to wind up being the one that's like, and by God, we're going to mine whatever, whenever, wherever, and we're going to leave the debris wherever, and by God, get your regulations off of my factory.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's just the messiness of politics.
Yeah. And the mirror image is true as well. But like the bumper stickers that say "Save the baby humans," we'll right. on a nice flow with a sign thing. Can we be consistent here?
That's right.
Can we just be consistent here?
Exactly. Yeah.
But boy, that's hard.
It is.
So,
good conversation. Thank you for your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate your time and your input. Did I surprise you, Bill? Did I? You said early on that you were going to let yourself be surprised by my take on the issue, but
I very
when
much.
It's all said and done, is it actually surprising? Or
yeah, no, actually, it was what I would have expected, which is a good, balanced approach to it, and ultimately coming down on the side of reality. And that's not the most typical thing that I would expect from so many people. But I salute you because, you wound up really echoing and respecting my concerns and reflecting my concerns, but also saying, we can't just be ideological or political about such life and death issues. Yeah. And the best thing to do is to proceed on course with things that can be done in a just and a fair way, and also that can be just and fair with their impacts on society, on the common good. Yeah.
Always be looking at that.
Yeah.
It's a never-ending process, but just being able to keep that in mind and trust that we'll get where we need to go if we work to keep that in mind. So.
Right.
So this is a special message here at the end of this podcast. This is Paul, just letting you know about a podcast that I've heard about called Food for Thought. Food for, the numeral 4, thought. It's put out by a guy named Jonathan Kutz, K-U-T-Z. There are some other Food for Thought podcasts out there, but this Food for Thought talks about a lot of topics, both philosophy and science from a Christian perspective. And so I've listened to several episodes of this podcast, and there's some interesting thoughts, especially in his episodes about the Epicurean philosophy and how he believes that it's very relevant today, the way that we look at the world. And also an episode titled Murderers of All Murderers, which is a quote from Nietzsche. So he brings in both Nietzsche and C.S. Lewis. That's also a very intriguing, thought-provoking episode. So if you like That's So Second Millennium, especially our more philosophical meanderings, thoughts, and perspective, you might also enjoy Jonathan Kutz, K-U-T-Z, and his Food for Thought. He's not only on your favorite podcast app, but he's also on Instagram and Twitter, and even on a platform I'm not familiar with yet called Locals. So you can look him up any of those places. But I will make sure that we leave some contact information for the podcast itself in the show notes. And yeah, if you get the chance, you might want to look up Food for Thought with Jonathan Kutz.
Thanks for listening to this episode of That's So Second Millennium. TSSM's audio producer is Morgan Burkhart. Our theme music, Igneous Grok, was composed and performed by Vin Marquardt. For my co-host Bill Schmidt, I'm Paul Giesting. Until next time.